Welcome to the Spy Who Raised Me podcast. Conversations between a daughter and her father. Yes, you've guessed it, he was a spy. My name's Iain Craigie and I'm here with my dad, Iain Craigie. The purpose of this podcast really is to capture the conversation between me and my dad and to talk about some of his experiences, some of the family's experiences, and to paint a picture of some of our upbringing and just of the man that Dad is. He's very adventurous, he's very people orientated, and he's always loved travel, and it's something that's rubbed off very much on me. So a couple of the places that we went on holiday as kids were Afghanistan and Gallipoli. So that kind of gives a little bit of background and flavour to Dad and his spirit of adventure, which even though he's now 81, he behaves like a 40-year-old and still has that spirit of adventure. And I'm sitting here with him in the northeast of Scotland on a sofa drinking coffee, and I'm going to start by asking him a little bit to introduce himself and to tell us a little bit about his early life, where he was born and where he was brought up. So, Dad.
Yeah, as Jane says, I'm 81-year-old. I think you could say I'm retired, but I still lead a very active life. And here in the northeast of Scotland, we're sitting in this sunroom near Turriff, basking in the sunshine, which is wonderful at this time of year. So I was born in southern Rhodesia, as it was then, in 1938, 8th of September. And I think probably a lot of that year, I was a year and a half, I think, when we came back to Scotland. My father had gone there originally in 1933 with my mother, and they decided at the beginning of the war to come back, but he was there for a number of years, and that was quite a normal thing for people from the north of Scotland, especially the rural areas, to go to Rhodesia, as it was then, Harare. And there's a lot happening in Africa at that time, setting up farms and farming infrastructure and so on. He had been preceded by Hamish, his brother, who had suffered from asthma, and one of the common places for doctors to send sufferers with asthma was to Rhodesia. So he went out there early in the 30s, and he got involved very much in setting up the agricultural scene in Rhodesia. So anyway, and just prior to the war in 1939, my father decided to come back to the UK with the family. Grant was the eldest, Jean was second, and I was the third. Subsequently, another sister was born in Scotland. So we set off on the Warwick Castle, Cunard liner that used to ply between a fading empire in India and Southampton, and it used to. I think that was the only route it plied, is backwards and forwards there. And so anyway, we caught the train, crossed the Kalahari Desert into Cape Town, and we have a copy of the passenger list. In fact, so there were the Craigie family and a number of other people, some who had come from India. So we got back to a country that was riven with the the start of a war, and Kingston in, well, Urquhart, first of all, a little thatched cottage in the northeast of Scotland. We found quite quickly, and we rented that first. It was a poky little place with a thatched roof, no toilet, no heating, and one bedroom for
between three kids
between three
and
kids.
2 adults.
Yes.
Wow.
And so we settled down there. My dad went to work as an engineer. Then, at the onset of war, he was posted to Palestine, which is quite an interesting place to be. But
and your dad, sorry to interrupt you, Dad, but your dad was called Naylor Craigie.
Naylor, yes, he was called Naylor Craigie. He was brought up in Rothes. In fact, the Craigie family had roots going back, I think, 3 generations in Rothes. We settled in Urquhart, very, very rural, small village with a school, a traditional Scottish village. We were affected a little by the war, because when the German bombers had been on raids further south in Glasgow, and I guess in England too, they used to come back and jettison their bombs, and apparently Urquhart was sort of under the flight path of these bombers, and occasionally they would drop a bomb, and you would hear this muffled explosion during the night. So we were evacuated
from
Urquhart, about 2 miles up the road to this elderly lady, Rose, her surname was, and she was typical of that era. She used to make tatties from the local farmer, and she used to shoot deer, roe deer.
That kept you fed.
That's all the food you had. Yes, we had. It was very difficult to get food. Of course, that was prior to rationing and so on. But it was just fairly desperate, because you had to live from hand to mouth, and so that was for, I think we stayed with Elsie Rose, her name was, for 2 years, and it was an odd experience, because in that generation were very hospitable, and nothing like these days. If people are fostered and so on, it's quite a big issue. They just said, okay, yes, come in, and looked after us, and so on. And eventually, at the end of the war, my father came back, and we stayed in Urquhart, by which time we had a toilet. One of my early memories is going up the garden. We had quite a big garden at the back of the cottage, and all the other inhabitants of the village did the same as we did. That was dig a hole and empty the bucket, which was normally outside in a shed, and then you had to then remember where you'd last dug, so as you didn't get this. and we had a neighbour called Mrs. Middleton, who was quite nosy, and she used to look over the fence and say, "No, you cannot put it there. You did that last week." so we had to shuffle around and then have a conference to find out who dug the last hole and where it was.
I should imagine, Dad, knowing you had a bit of fun with that.
That was good fun. Yes, it was good fun, but that improved quite quickly over a period of 5 years, and I can remember the first toilet that went in. It had no plumbing at first, so we had to we had to be careful we didn't steal a quick pee in the toilet with no water, and then we got we got smacked and told not to do that. But yeah, no, it was a different era, and it was an agricultural area. So I reckon agricultural and fishing was the mainstay of that area. And the school, we often reminisce about those of us who are still on the go. And the school was a small school in a village of probably, how many children would have been in the village? I'd have thought 30 children, perhaps. And so we used to, I think there was one class, sometimes two, depending on whether we had one or two teachers. And there's no paper, no pencils. So we used slates for writing on, and slate pencils. They were called little hard, sharply pointed bits of slate. It was. So we scribed on that.
And was that, Dad, because there was no supplies after the war?
Supplies, yes, no supplies,
no paper,
no pencils. So anyway, we had that was quite funny because you had to have, one of the disciplines of the school was that you had to fill a little box with a wet rag, so that every Monday morning the teacher, who was called Miss Thompson, she was quite strict, and she had funny glasses, like little glasses, round glasses, and she would say, "Children, open your boxes." So you'd open your boxes to make sure that your box had water in it, so you could wipe it. But there was one boy who was a farmer's son, and he always used to forget to fill his box to dampen his cloth, so he used to pee in his box. And his name was Jimmy Petrie. I mean, I think he died a long time ago, so you won't mind me saying it. But so he used to get every other Monday he would get told off by Miss Thompson and say, "Jimmy Petrie, you must not pee in your box. You mustn't." So, but it didn't make any difference. Yeah, he always came in with this. So that was school in a village, and we moved from there after, I think it was about 5 years, and moved to a village in close to Elgin, closer to Elgin. It was on the estuary of the River Spey, and my father bought a house there. But the interesting thing about Kingston was it was a dead end. No school. The school was in the neighbouring village of Garmouth, and in the 1850s, two entrepreneurs from Kingston upon Hull in England saw a huge opportunity for building ships in the village
Of Kingston on
Spey. Yeah. So they came out and built two wonderful houses for themselves, because they were crofter houses, little cotter houses, very small. And that was the house that we lived in for when we moved from Urquhart.
So that was, when did they build those houses? 1800s?
That was, yes, 1800s. So, and what they did was, check it out, Google it, it's well worth a look. And they came, and there was no supply of wood, and the road system wasn't very good. So they decided that they could set up a shipbuilding company in this little village on the estuary of the Spey. So they went upstream, having done some detective work beforehand, and they found this wonderful stand of mature Scots pines at Rothimarcus, I think it was upriver. So they went to the owner of the forest, who was a laird, I think. I can't remember what he was called, but anyway, they approached him and said, "Would you be interested in selling us part of the forest?" So they reached a deal, and so they procured, these two men procured this substantial area of prime wood. It was such good wood, and so then they had to try and get that from the forest up near Aviemore down to the estuary of the Spey, the mouth of the Spey. So they got 100 or a couple of hundred men cutting trees, huge trees. They were mature trees, rolling them down the banks into the Spey, tying them together like rafts, waiting for the right conditions, because they had to not only guide them downstream and keep them away from the banks, but they also had to make sure that when they arrived at Kingston, at the estuary of the Spey, that there wasn't a northeasterly storm coming in, because that way they'd have lost all the wood into the Moray Firth. So that's what they did, and they set up this incredible shipbuilding business with ocean-going schooners, and most of them sold into the tea trade. And they had some really big ships. A terrible storm in 1829, I think it was, a bit later maybe. That was an enormous storm that got rid of about half of the boats that they were in the process of building, and those finished up scattered along the shores of the Moray Firth. They managed to save some of them, but so then they went on, the same two men from Kingston upon Hull, and by this time they'd built up their workforce through local people and local joiners and so on, and they set up an incredible system whereby they harnessed water and wind to cut those huge trees that were coming down the Spey into the village. So initially they had to do that by hand with pits, with one man in the bottom of the pit and one standing above with a cross-cut saw. So heaven help the guy who was in the bottom of the pit. I think they took turnabout. They used to drink heavily, I think, and you can imagine. Full sawdust up their nostrils and so on. But anyway, so that went on into the early 1900s, by which time they had started building steamships, and a number of steamships were built there. But over the next 20 years or so, the shipyards closed down, and it returned to a sleepy little village with no real industry, except for the fact that some of the artisans who were working on the shipbuilding effort migrated to the fishing industry. So there was Bucky and Cullen and Banff and Macduff, where they were building boats to fish in the North Sea and go on whaling trips. So that's where they finished up.
So the industry ended in Kingston, but certainly there were a lot of young loons, boys, so that's the Doric for boys,
right?
Who remained very industrious and adventurous, and you were probably one of the ringleaders of being wild, and you had a lot of freedom to explore the area, and you used to create quite a lot of mayhem, I understand. So could you tell us a little bit about your upbringing?
Well, I mean, that was a rural village in Scotland, and I mean, we'd know there was eventually one bus a week, I think. But basically, you were stuck with your school friends. You were stuck with who lived in the village. So, and you had to amuse yourself somehow. So we were all very proficient fishers. We poached salmon sometimes too, and learned how to use a snare to catch a salmon, and we helped the salmon fishing industry, which was very active at that time, netting salmon as it came from the North Sea into the River Spey. But I mean, we had a policeman in the neighbouring village, Garmouth, who was quite often down chasing the boys of Kingston because we were unruly, and we did things like one thing we loved to do was in the baker's shop. There's a little baker's shop that was very kind of cosy and couthy, and it had a low roof and a chimney, and he used to bake his bread and have peat in his ovens to give the heat. So we used to climb up on the back of this little house with a clod of turf, and when he was firing up in the morning for his we used to put this turf on the chimney, which we could just about reach from the bank at the back, and then give him about 5 minutes to realise that his place was filling up with smoke and peat fumes, and of course it spoiled his bake for that day. So we used to get into trouble with the policeman, who was a hefty sort of guy, and he would come down. Now, boys, he would line us all up and say, you've done it again. We're going to have to do something serious about this, you see. So doing something serious was having a word with our parents and saying, do not let him do that again. So it was never really taken seriously. And the other thing about the village was that there were so many, I mean, this thing of dementia and Alzheimer's and so on, it was there then, as you would expect, but of course it was never looked upon as a medical condition. It was referred to as people being dottled, and that meant that they would work away, and because it was a village, they would look after each other. There was an old lady called Miss Jackson, who used to live quite close to us, and she used to boil eggs in a teapot and things like that. So we used to all go round and say, you boiled your egg in your teapot today, Miss Jackson? No, she would say, but everyone kind of dropped in and helped, So it was a good place to be brought up, and the nature, of course, in an area like that was just incredible. Spey, the Moray Firth, dolphins in the Moray Firth, an abundance of seals, and at that time salmon used to come in huge quantities, and then there was a lot of forest land, sandy beaches, pebbly beaches with this huge river that scoured the uplands, and just a lovely place. A variety of birds, and nesting seabirds, and sand martins, and woodcocks, and corncrakes. We used to walk to school. It's about a mile to school from Kingston to Garmouth, and there would be this daily refrain of corncrakes and the cornfields and so on. They're not there now. They're still in Hebrides, I think. They still have corncrakes. But so that was the village. Of course, you went on from there to Fochabers was the secondary school we used to go to, which was about five miles away, and then from there to Aberdeen University, if that's what you wanted to do. I went to Elgin. In fact, I did for 5 years at Fochabers, got some of my hires, and then moved to Elgin Academy to do some more hires, and then eventually go to university.
So that was Marshall College in Aberdeen?
That was Marshall College in Aberdeen. Some notable people there at the time. Professor R.V. Jones was one of them, who wrote the Most Secret Wars, with how the Germans managed to navigate when they came to bomb Coventry and Glasgow and so on. So he worked out how they managed to do that. But so there was notable people there. Professor Mauser, he was the chemistry professor. He was an odd specimen. He wore trousers that were too short for him, and he had a sprout of hair. It was like a mad professor. And he used to love. There was one experiment he did that he used a chanty for potty, and he was quite a showman. So you'd walk in for a lecture, and you'd hear this muffled voice saying, "Sit down, everybody. I'm just preparing." So he would be behind his lectern, out of sight, and you would hear this clinking and clanking, and all of a sudden he would appear. He would stand out with this potty, this chanty, in his hand, brandishing it and waving it. Everyone cheered, of course. And then he had some chemical process that he put a 6-inch nail in this potty and poured on the chemical, and it went, and there's this explosion, and the 6-inch nail used to disappear, and that was. But that was Aberdeen University, a wonderful place.
One of my observations there is something that's been enduring through your life. You notice very particular things about people, and you retain them, and they amuse you, and they inform you.
Yeah.
And I love that about you. I love the way that whoever it is, you will always make an observation. The other thing that you will always do in a room of people, if there's somebody standing on their own, you'll go and speak to them and make a determined effort to go and speak to them.
That's true. That's true. You often find that those are the most interesting people.
Yeah. Well, I think, Dad, we need to go for a cup of coffee and end this podcast here. So thank you ever so much, Dad. I have learned so much. I thought I knew heaps about your early life, and there's stories there that I hadn't heard before. And in any family, you have fables and stories that endure through storytelling, and you're a fantastic storyteller. But there are things that have just been so interesting to hear, that as children we never asked, and I think as children you don't ask those questions.
No, that's right. You don't. You sort of over the years, I think you suddenly, like you say, you suddenly think, wow, that's not part of my family history, but that's what's good about this is going back over the years, and especially with older people, is recording and finding out what changes have happened during the intervening years, and good.
Well, thank you very much, Dad.
You're
Been
welcome.
fascinating.